Somewhere in the jungles of Costa Rica, there are bees that have never touched a flower in their entire evolutionary history. They don't collect pollen. They don't visit blossoms. Instead, they swarm the carcasses of dead lizards, dead frogs, dead birds, anything rotting on the forest floor. They chew the flesh apart, store it in their gut, and fly it back to the hive. And over the next 2 weeks, their bodies convert that decaying meat into something that looks and feels almost exactly like honey. They're called vulture bees, and their gut bacteria have more in common with actual vultures than with any other bee alive. There are only 3 species on the planet that do this: Trigona hypogea, Trigona crassips, and Trigona necrophaga. All 3 live in the tropical forests of Central and South America, and all 3 belong to the stingless bee family. They were first classified almost 2 centuries ago, but nobody realized what they were actually eating until 1982. For nearly 200 years, scientists assumed these were just regular stingless bees with slightly weird habits. Turns out, their habits weren't slightly weird. They were completely unprecedented. So how does a bee, a creature whose entire evolutionary lineage is built around flowers and pollen, end up feeding on dead animals? The answer starts with their mouths. Typical bees have soft, fuzzy mouthparts designed for lapping up nectar and handling delicate pollen grains. Vulture bees evolved sharp, pointed mandibles, 5 extra teeth on each one. These mandibles are built for cutting through skin and muscle tissue, not for handling flower petals. When a vulture bee finds a carcass, and they find them fast, they enter through the eyes. That's not random. The eye sockets are one of the softest entry points on a dead animal, and these bees know it. Once inside, they start secreting formic acid and digestive enzymes from their salivary glands directly onto the rotting flesh. The acid breaks down the tissue, softening it until they can chew off small chunks and swallow them into a specialized crop, a storage pouch in the bee's gut that's separate from the actual digestive stomach. Then they fly home. Back at the colony, forager bees regurgitate the partially digested meat into the mouths of processor bees. These processor bees chew and reprocess the material over and over again, passing it between individuals, layering it with additional glandular secretions. The colony stores this proteinaceous paste in wax pots inside the nest. A separate set of pots holds sugary material the bees collect from plant resins and some nectar sources. Over roughly 14 days, the meat paste matures. Enzymes from the bees' hypopharyngeal glands, the same glands that honeybees use to produce royal jelly, transform the rotting flesh into a thick, sweet, protein-rich secretion. People call it meat honey. That name is a little misleading. A detailed study of Trigona hypogea in Brazil found that the bees kept their meat-derived protein paste and their sugar-derived stores in separate pots within the colony. They did mix them eventually into a combined food source. But neither component on its own qualifies as true honey in the technical sense, because it's not derived purely from flower nectar. The substance from Trigona necrophaga in Panama was even more clearly separated. Researchers found the bees produced conventional honey from nectar and kept a completely distinct glandular secretion made from carrion. No mixing at all in that case. So meat honey is more of a catchy label than a precise description. What these bees actually produce is a protein-rich glandular food product that happens to have a sweet honey-like consistency. Still, the fact that they produce any of this from dead animals is remarkable. And the biological machinery that makes it possible is even more so. In 2021, a research team led by entomologist Quinn McFrederick at the University of California, Riverside published a study in the journal MBio that cracked open one of the biggest remaining questions about vulture bees. How do their bodies handle all that rotting meat without getting sick? Bees in the corbiculate family, the group that includes honeybees, bumblebees, orchid bees, and stingless bees, share a core set of 5 bacterial groups in their guts. These bacteria have been conserved across the corbiculate lineage for millions of years. They help with nutrition, they defend against parasites, and they assist with detoxification. The McFrederick lab wanted to know whether vulture bees still carried this ancestral microbiome, or whether their diet had rewritten it entirely. The experiment was beautifully simple. The team hung pieces of raw chicken from tree branches in the Costa Rican rainforest. Fresh chicken dangling in the jungle heat. Then they waited. Vulture bees arrived, along with facultatively necrophagous species, bees that eat meat sometimes, but still visit flowers too, and stand pollen-feeding stingless bees. The researchers collected specimens from all 3 dietary groups, preserved them in ethanol, and sequenced their gut microbiomes. The results were striking. Obligate vulture bees, the ones that eat nothing but carrion, had undergone the most dramatic microbial shift. 2 of the ancestral core bacteria, Snodgrassella and Gilliamella, which are abundant in nearly every other corbiculate bee, were either absent or present in extremely low numbers. In their place, the vulture bee gut was dominated by acid-loving bacteria. Lactobacillus, the genus you find in sourdough bread and foods, was present at high levels. So was Carnobacterium, a genus known specifically for its ability to break down animal flesh. These are not bacteria you find in a typical bee gut. They're bacteria you find in the guts of hyenas and vultures. If you're going to build your entire diet around rotting meat, you have a serious pathogen problem. Dead animal tissue is crawling with harmful bacteria, things like Clostridium and Salmonella that can kill most insects. The acidophilic bacteria in the vulture bee gut appear to solve this by making the entire gut environment more acidic. Carnobacterium and Apolactobacillus, which the McFrederick study identified as enriched in vulture bees, produce lactic acid and acetic acid as metabolic byproducts. That acidic environment suppresses pathogen growth. It's the same principle behind why fermented foods last longer than raw ones. The acid is a preservative, and these bees carry it inside their own bodies. The facultatively necrophagous bees, the ones that eat both meat and pollen, showed intermediate microbiome compositions. They had some of the acidophilic bacteria, but they also retained more of the ancestral core. The pure pollen feeders, by contrast, had gut microbiomes almost identical to what you'd get from honeybees and bumblebees. The dietary gradient mapped almost perfectly onto the microbial gradient. The more meat a species ate, the more its gut bacteria resembled those of mammalian carrion feeders. If you enjoy learning about the strange corners of biology, you'll find more stories like this on the channel. Hit subscribe so you don't miss them. The McFrederick study also turned up something unexpected about how these bees physically collect their food. Vulture bees have dramatically reduced corbicula, the pollen baskets on the hind legs that most bees use for transporting pollen. Since vulture bees don't collect pollen, you'd expect these structures to have atrophied. They have shrunk, but they haven't disappeared. The researchers observed vulture bees using their diminished leg baskets to carry small pieces of masticated chicken back to the nest. As McFrederick put it, they had little chicken baskets. That detail reveals something about how evolution works in practice. When a structure loses its original function, it doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it gets co-opted. The pollen basket became a meat basket, repurposed rather than discarded. It's the same kind of exaptation you see across biology. Bird feathers started as insulation before they became flight surfaces. Swim bladders in fish became lungs. The vulture bee's chicken basket is a small, slightly absurd example of the same principle. And the evolutionary timeline here is worth considering. All three vulture bee species share a common ancestor that was, as far as we can tell, a normal pollen-feeding stingless bee. The split happened relatively recently in evolutionary terms. These species are still nested firmly within the Trigona genus, surrounded by hundreds of pollen-feeding relatives. Their transition to obligate necrophagy, feeding exclusively on dead animal tissue, happened after the stingless bee lineage had already established itself. They didn't inherit carnivory from some ancient predatory ancestor, they invented it. That makes them one of the only examples of a pollinator lineage producing obligate carnivores. Other bees occasionally scavenge protein from dead insects or animal droppings. A handful of species are what biologists call facultative necrophages, opportunistic meat-eaters that still rely on flowers for most of their nutrition. Only these three Trona species went all the way. They crossed a dietary line that no other bee in the roughly 20,000 known species has crossed. The chemical ecology of their nests is different too. Normal stingless bee colonies smell like wax and propolis and fermented honey. Vulture bee nests reportedly have a sour, pungent odor, consistent with the lactic acid fermentation happening inside. The wax pots that store their meat paste and their sugar stores are structurally similar to those found in other stingless bee colonies. But the chemistry inside is a different world. Where a typical stingless bee pot contains fermented honey or processed pollen, a vulture bee pot contains a substance that started its life as a dead frog's thigh muscle. There are still major unanswered questions. The McFrederick team noted that they sequenced the full abdomens of these tiny bees, not just isolated guts, because the specimens were too small for precise dissection. That means the microbiome data includes bacteria from the crop, the hindgut, and potentially reproductive tissues. Figuring out exactly which bacteria live where and which ones are doing the heavy lifting in meat processing versus pathogen defense is the next frontier. The team also wants to sequence the genomes of the novel bacteria they found, along with any fungi and viruses living inside these bees. We know that vulture bees evolved acidophilic gut bacteria to survive on carrion. We know they repurposed their pollen baskets to carry meat. We know their colony food storage system runs on the same architectural plan as their pollen-feeding relatives, just loaded with completely different chemistry. But we still don't fully understand what triggered this dietary revolution in the first place, or how the gut microbiome restructured itself on an evolutionary timescale. Somewhere in the Costa Rican jungle, right now a group of tiny stingless bees with sharp mandibles and chicken baskets on their legs is crawling into the eye socket of a dead lizard, chewing off pieces of softened flesh and flying it back to a waxpot pantry, where it will slowly ferment into something sweet. Every other bee on Earth builds its life around flowers. These three species looked at a corpse and saw a buffet.